Something happened at Lot 8 that nobody on the team had fully anticipated. This is the story of the curse of Oak Island and the discovery at Lot 8 that may finally expose the tunnel the team has been chasing for years. What the ground revealed at Lot 8 and what that discovery appears to point toward is what this video will walk through from beginning to end. But before we get to that moment, we need to understand three important things: what Lot 8 actually is, what the tunnel has represented throughout this investigation, and why the possible connection between the two could change the direction of the search in a way that previous discoveries have not. Lot 8 is a specific and clearly defined area of Oak Island. It is not the most famous part of the island, nor is it the area that has received the largest machinery or the deepest drilling over the years. Oak Island has always had a clear center of attention: the Money Pit Zone, where the original discovery was made in 1795 and where most of the major excavation efforts have been concentrated for more than 2 centuries. Lot 8 is positioned differently on the island's map. It sits away from the center of the known underground system, in an area offset from the money pit and the swamp. That location has made it an interesting part of the investigation, even though it has never received the same level of attention as the primary excavation zones. Previous seasons produced findings in and around Lot 8 that were interesting enough to document and investigate, but they were never specific enough to make the area the main focus of the search. Ground-penetrating radar was used across the area. Core samples were collected, and the results were added to the growing record of evidence. For a long time, that evidence suggested that something could be present beneath the ground, but it did not clearly reveal what that something was. This episode changed that picture. The tunnel is the reason the discovery at Lot 8 carries so much significance. To understand why, it is important to be precise about what this tunnel represents and why the team has spent multiple seasons trying to locate it. This is not simply a natural geological formation. It appears to be an underground passage, potentially a deliberately constructed corridor that may have been used to connect different sections of the island's underground system with one another and with the surrounding water table. Oak Island's flood tunnel network is the most famous example of this type of underground construction. These tunnels are believed to be responsible for allowing seawater to enter the primary excavation area whenever digging reaches certain depths, creating one of the greatest obstacles investigators have faced. However, the passage the team has been tracking is believed to be separate from the already known flood tunnels. Its location and direction have been suggested by different pieces of data, but until now, there has not been enough evidence to fully confirm its existence. Finding that passage would mean more than simply adding another discovery to the long history of Oak Island. It could provide a crucial navigational key. Once the physical structure is located, the underground layout of the island could become far easier to understand than it has ever been before. That is what makes the search such a priority. And that is why what happened at Lot 8 matters so much. Oak Island has been investigated for a very long time, and that fact alone does not need to be exaggerated. The first recorded discovery of unusual underground workings dates back to 1795. A young man noticed a depression in the ground, began digging, and eventually encountered oak platforms placed at regular intervals beneath the surface. What was waiting at the bottom was never discovered, and neither did the people who came after him. For more than 2 centuries, the same pattern has repeated itself. Investigation teams make discoveries that suggest they are getting closer to an answer, only to be stopped by the island's defensive systems before reaching the conclusion they were searching for. The flood tunnels have been among the most effective obstacles, but they are not the only challenge. Unstable ground, complicated water management problems, and the enormous scale of what appears to exist beneath the island have all contributed to a history filled with discoveries but lacking a definitive final answer. By season 13, the team had more information about the underground geography than ever before. The evidence had begun forming a much clearer picture of what could be happening beneath Oak Island, and increasingly, that evidence was pointing toward Lot 8. The evidence that eventually built toward this discovery came together in stages. Earlier in the season, ground-penetrating radar scans were conducted across a corridor that included the Lot 8 area. Those scans revealed anomalies that immediately attracted the team's attention and required closer investigation. The signals did not resemble the irregular and gradual patterns normally associated with untouched natural ground. Instead, they appeared unusual enough to suggest that something beneath the surface could be responsible for the readings. That was the point where Lot 8 began to look less like another interesting location on the island, and more like a possible piece of the larger underground puzzle the team had been trying to solve for generations. They had shape and defined edges at depth, showing the kind of geometric consistency that natural geology does not normally produce on its own. Core samples taken from the flagged area also revealed soil composition that pointed toward disturbed or deliberately placed material, rather than natural layers. In other words, the ground appeared to have been moved and restructured at depth, in a configuration more consistent with a constructed feature than a natural geological formation. The directional analysis of underground features that the team had confirmed in earlier seasons, including tunnels, corridors, and connected passages, added another important piece to the puzzle. When those features were mapped across the island, their projected lines pointed toward the Lot 8 area as a possible point of convergence. The team had not selected Lot 8 at random. The data had led them there. By the time the dig day arrived, the main question was no longer whether Lot 8 contained something significant. The real question was what exactly the ground would reveal. The morning of the excavation did not appear to be anything unusual. In fact, most mornings on Oak Island begin in much the same way. The team went through its standard routine, checking the equipment, reviewing the day's plan, confirming the target area, and going over the specific data points that had directed their attention toward Lot 8. The discussion remained focused and practical. There was no unusual excitement or strong indication that this particular day would be different from the careful, methodical investigation that had defined Season 13 from the beginning. Lot 8 was the focus because the evidence had made it the focus. The team was returning with more precise targeting than previous visits had allowed because the earlier scans had produced readings that were too significant to ignore. Then the equipment moved across the ground. The readings began coming in, and something changed. The shift in the radar return was not subtle. Ground-penetrating radar works by sending pulses into the Earth and measuring how those signals reflect back. Different materials produce different patterns. Natural layers typically create gradual and irregular reflections that match the way undisturbed ground naturally forms. A constructed feature behaves differently. It can produce clear edges and consistent boundaries that are difficult to explain through natural geology alone. The return from a particular section of Lot 8 showed exactly those characteristics. Instead of the organic variation expected from undisturbed ground, the radar revealed a defined structure at depth. More importantly, that structure appeared at a location and depth that matched what earlier data from the investigation had predicted. The team ran the pass again. The signal remained. That consistency made the result much harder to dismiss as a random anomaly. Core drilling was then started at the flagged location. The drill was taken down to the depth indicated by the radar, bringing samples of the material back to the surface as it moved through the ground. The samples revealed a noticeable change in soil composition at precisely the depth the radar had identified. The material appeared disturbed and deliberately placed, providing further evidence that something constructed could exist beneath the surface, even though there was nothing visible above ground to suggest it. At this point, the conclusion suggested by the evidence had very few alternative explanations left. As is often the case on Oak Island, the confirmation did not arrive through one single discovery. Instead, it came through a sequence of pieces that gradually converged. Each new piece of evidence eliminated another possible explanation until the remaining explanation became increasingly difficult to ignore. The radar indicated a structure. The core samples pointed toward deliberate construction at depth. Additional drilling was then carried out at locations offset from the original target. Those results continued to show a similar disturbed soil profile and the same indicators of a constructed feature. More importantly, they suggested that whatever was beneath the ground did not exist at just one isolated point. It appeared to continue in a particular direction, and that distinction was extremely important. A single point could represent a buried object. But when evidence shows that a structure continues from one location toward another, the possibility of a passage becomes much stronger. At Lot 8, the team now had evidence pointing toward an underground passage of considerable age. The data was beginning to reveal the direction in which that passage appeared to run. That direction immediately raised the biggest question of all. Where was it going? When the apparent direction of the Lot 8 passage was plotted against the underground map that Season 13 had been developing, it appeared to point toward the same general zone where the tunnel the team had been tracking was believed to run. That did not provide absolute proof. It was not the kind of certainty that would come from extended mapping, further excavation, and laboratory analysis. But the alignment was significant enough for the team to recognize, in real time, that the discovery at Lot 8 could be connected to something much larger. What they had found was not necessarily just an isolated feature beneath Lot 8. It could be another important data point in the larger underground system the team had been trying to understand for years. The physical finding at Lot 8 appeared to connect this part of the island with the underground corridor that had been the investigation's main tracking target for multiple seasons. The money pit, the swamp, the flood tunnel network, and the directional analysis of previously identified passages now had a new reference point. The location of that reference point, along with the direction the passage appeared to take, was consistent with the possibility that the tunnel could be reached from this angle. For the first time, the investigation had physical evidence supporting that possibility. Confirming the tunnel's location would have major implications for the entire search. The island's underground system was never believed to be a single structure. Instead, it appears to be a network made up of different components designed to work together. Passages connected various parts of that system and may have allowed the builders to move through it while also serving as part of the concealment and defensive design. The flood tunnels are the clearest example. These passages appear to have been designed to interfere with excavation by allowing seawater to enter the primary dig area whenever it was disturbed. The tunnel the team has been tracking appears to serve a different purpose. It may connect separate sections of the underground system in a way that, once its location is confirmed and properly mapped, could give the investigators a navigational tool they have never had before. It could potentially provide a route toward the center of the system from a direction that the flood tunnels were not specifically designed to defend against. That is why the discovery matters. It is not simply another interesting finding. It could directly affect how the investigation moves forward. The team's reaction to the Lot 8 confirmation was captured by the cameras in the moments before everyone returned to their usual professional composure. There were noticeable pauses. Conversations became quieter before continuing. The significance of the discovery was clearly being absorbed. These are investigators who have spent enough time on Oak Island to understand that getting excited before all the evidence is available can lead to mistakes. But in this case, the evidence was there, and the potential meaning of what they had just found was difficult to completely hide. The expressions on the team's faces immediately after the confirmation did not look like the reactions of people who had simply encountered another interesting anomaly. They looked like the reactions of people who had just discovered something capable of changing the way they had viewed the underground system for years. Rick Lagina and Marty Lagina reacted to the discovery in ways that longtime viewers would recognize. Their responses were very different from one another, but both appeared genuine. Rick's reaction was that of someone whose belief in Oak Island has never depended on outside confirmation, but who had just received a significant piece of evidence supporting that belief. He was not celebrating. Instead, his attention became even more focused on what came next. His questions centered on the direction of the passage, what that direction could mean, and how quickly the investigation might be able to follow the evidence toward its potential destination. Marty's response was different. He appeared to process the information more cautiously, taking time to consider what the physical evidence actually meant. He was not dismissive of the discovery. Instead, he approached it methodically, examining the information from different angles before reaching a firm conclusion. That difference in their reactions is part of what makes the moment so interesting. Neither response arrived at exactly the same place, and the question of which interpretation will ultimately prove correct remains open. The historical record of Oak Island also contains references that take on a different appearance when viewed alongside the Lot 8 discovery. Earlier investigators who worked in the wider area around Lot 8 documented anomalies that they could not explain with the technology or understanding available to them at the time. There were reports of unusual resistance in certain areas of the ground, readings that appeared different from the surrounding soil, and descriptions of features that investigators considered unusual enough to record, even though they had no clear explanation for them. The Lot 8 confirmation does not prove that those earlier investigators were observing the same structure that the current team has now identified. However, it does make the similarities between those historical observations and the current evidence more difficult to dismiss than they were before this discovery. Still, the tunnel is not suddenly within easy reach. The area between Lot 8 and the tunnel's predicted location presents several serious challenges. Water management in this section of the island requires careful preparation, and the relationship between the ground and Oak Island's tidal hydrology creates a risk of water infiltration whenever excavation reaches greater depths. The stability of the ground along the potential route is another concern. Any attempt to follow the passage will have to account for the condition of the surrounding material and the possibility that deeper excavation could create additional structural and water-related problems.